Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Two good martinis for you today, as well as a definite bad one. Certainly smacks of craziness as well. But Jim, let's head over to the Middle East for a good martini. We don't get to say that too often. Yesterday, right around the time I think that we were recording yesterday's podcast, Israel launched a strike against the residence of the Iranian ambassador in Damascus, Syria. And that residence is, as you might expect, next to the Iranian embassy. This strike seems to have been very precise, and we have two high-profile casualties here. One is Ziad al-Nakhala, the Secretary General of Palestinian Islamic Jihad. What was he doing at the Iranian embassy? I thought that the allegations of Iranian meddling and all this stuff was scurrilous. But meanwhile, another one that was killed is Brigadier General Mohammad Reza Zahedi, the most senior Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps officer to be killed since the U.S. assassinated Qasem Soleimani in early 2020. The sad part here is that the Biden administration is groveling to Tehran and making it clear we had no involvement in this. We didn't even know about it ahead of time. It's obvious that they are desperate to make clear to the Iranians that they had no advanced knowledge and certainly had no part in planning this. But so it's a good martini that it was a precise strike. It seems like these are legitimate targets, given Iran's funding of Hamas and other radical groups that love to target and try to kill Israelis. So other than the Biden administration's less than ideal reaction here, this seems to have been a good move.
Greg, I kind of feel like the appropriate response, if the Iranians had accused the U.S. of having some hand in this, which there's no reason to think we did. The Israelis are perfectly capable of doing this sort of thing on their own. But an Iranian diplomatic facility didn't have its territory respected and violence occurred at an embassy? Oh, Iran, that's terrible. That's terrible. That's a shame. Trust me, we've been there. That's one of the reasons we don't have an embassy in your country, because you guys did this to a whole bunch of innocent U.S. diplomats and embassy employees and such. Look, I am among those who believe that you should do everything you can to respect diplomatic immunity. I won't even make the usual Lethal Weapon 2 jokes here. There's a reason these places are off limits. There's a reason these places are traditionally seen as the sovereign territory of the country that they are that the host country has an obligation to protect those facilities, even if we don't like them. I did not expect to do a Ukraine story today, but at one point while walking through Kyiv, my friend and I found ourselves walking past the Chinese embassy. And they have all kinds of posters in front about how awesome China is and look at all the beautiful scenery and all that stuff. And really not a lot of talk about how we're buying so much oil from Russia so that they can continue to buy weapons to try to kill you people outside of the embassy. But there's a Ukrainian cop outside. And when my friend and I were sitting there looking at the posters and kind of shaking our head, he was eyeballing us because he did not want anybody causing it. That's the way it's supposed to work. When you invite terrorists into your embassy, I do think you lose some of those protections. And I have no dispute that the head of Palestinian Islamic Jihad qualifies as a terrorist and is a legitimate military target. You want to avoid any other civilian casualties in situations like that. But if you host the head of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, you run the risks of some Israeli missile falling on your head. And that's the way things work. So good for the Israelis for getting this guy. I don't think that the U.S. needs to bend over backwards to assure the Iranians that we would never want to harm anybody involved in Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But hey, that's what we've come to expect from this administration. Good for them, and good to send that signal that to terrorists there is no safe base, there is no safe spaces, metaphorical or literal. There is no place you can hide. The Israelis are not afraid to hit you wherever they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it puts the lie to this idea that Iran is some respectable bystander here who might have the ear of proxy groups at different times. No, they're actively collaborating with Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And so, like you said, that becomes a more legitimate target. Now, because Israel's done this, will there be, a ratcheting up of threats against our locations like we saw in the months following the 10/7 attacks? Will there be other reprisals happening in the region and beyond, that's a fair question. We don't know what that's going to happen. So there could be some significant fallout from this. But in terms of whether this is a legitimate target, I think we've answered that pretty well here. All right, let's talk about Fast-Growing Trees, the #1 and biggest online nursery in the United States with more than 10,000 different kinds of plants and more than 2 million happy customers right here in the United States. You too can grow lemon, avocado, olive, or fig trees inside your home on top of the wide variety of houseplants they have available.
Fast-Growing Trees makes it easy to order online, and your plants will be shipped directly to your door in just 1 or 2 days. And along with their 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee, they offer free plant consultation forever.
Yeah, depending on the plant you get, it might be one you just enjoy having in your house for years, like we have with our fig and monstera plants, or it might be something you actually incorporate into your meals, like when we got the oregano and the basil and the dill. Already have used some of the oregano and can't wait to try the rest. And so right now, Fast Growing Trees has the best deals online, up to half off on select plants, and listeners to the 3 Martini Lunch get an additional 15% off their first purchase when using the code Martini at checkout. That's an additional 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code Martini at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com, code Martini. Offer is valid for a limited time, and tell them that we sent you. All right, Jim, on to our second good martini. And while you were gone, Inez Stetman and I did a martini on the reemergence of Christine Blasey Ford. It's hard to believe it's almost 6 years ago now that she emerged out of nowhere to accuse Brett Kavanaugh of sexual assault back when they were in high school in Maryland back in 1982. And if high school senior Brett Kavanaugh hadn't kept copious calendars and none of Christine Blasey Ford's alleged witnesses had no idea what the heck she was talking about, that could have done a lot more to derail the Kavanaugh nomination. But what we talked about then was that Christine Blasey Ford suddenly has no fear of flying because she went to New York and sat with the ladies of The View who fawned all over her. The Atlantic did a story saying she had the evidence and Kavanaugh brought the narrative. And it's just a complete gaslighting of the whole situation. But now, over at the Washington Post, where we should point out that you're also a columnist, fellow columnist Kathleen Parker is not giving Christine Blasey Ford the kid gloves. She's actually talking about facts and the real story here. And she also says, in addition to Kavanaugh being accused by Blasey Ford, 2 of the people that Blasey Ford considered eyewitnesses to this, Mark Judge, as well as Leland Kaiser, were basically run through the mud as well, because when they didn't back up her account because they had no recollection of anything like that, there were people that harassed, particularly Leland Kaiser, trying to get her to change her story. And Mark Judge, who kept quiet to himself but wrote a book about it called The Devil's Triangle, Mark Judge versus the New American Stasi. And so what Kathleen Parker says here is, both Judge and Kaiser, it seems, deserve the applause Ford is receiving for perpetuating a questionable history that has damaged so many people, not to mention the judicial system she says she has sought to protect. We know the truth is otherwise thanks to a video capture of Ford's lawyer, Deborah Katz, saying that her client wanted to block Kavanaugh because of fears he would vote to reverse Roe v. Wade. It takes guts to try to breach the Me Too Iron Curtain, as Judge is attempting to do. It takes no courage at all to enrich yourself at other people's expense, as Ford has done. So, Jim, it would have been nice to see this type of analysis at the time when the facts and the alleged corroborating testimony didn't materialize. But better now than never, given the fact that Blasey Ford is still a darling of the left, even though this story of hers seems to be fact-free.
Greg, you and I agree 90-some% of the time. I think I might dispute a bit about whether Christine Blasey Ford really is still a darling of the left. You won't see any criticism of her from the left. But, and you know, she was on The View. This publication of this book has gotten a certain amount of attention. I think there was somebody, I want to say it was Kat Rosenfield, but I could be wrong, but who went through and noted that the New York Times review of Ford's book was very check the box. This is brave. It is an important, but it was not a cover of the New York Times book review section, you know, gushing about it. I think everybody, when I think about Christine Blasey Ford, I'm reminded of another name that'll probably jog the memories of our listeners. Cindy Sheehan, the mom of the slain soldier in Iraq who was celebrated back in the Bush days, particularly around Bush's second term, the run up to the 2006 midterms. Maureen Dowd had declared that she had absolute moral authority. And look, anybody who loses a child in service to their country deserves our sympathy, deserves our support. But Cindy Sheehan, every word she said, which was usually bristling criticism of George W. Bush, was taken as if it came down on 2 stone tablets from Moses, and that had, and there was no scrutiny, no criticism. You could even go further back and say there was a quartet of 9/11 widows who basically became not just celebrities, but kind of icons to folks on the left. And then, Bush won re-election, and the 9/11 widows largely disappeared from the discourse. Bush left office, and Cindy Sheehan left office. I think she ran against Nancy Pelosi in her district out in San Francisco. And once Cindy Sheehan was no longer a useful cudgel to hit Republicans with, a whole bunch of Democrats lost interest in her. Oh, by the way, the interest in Democrats in ending the Iraq War, you can look at the polling numbers, dramatically changed in January and February 2009. As soon as Obama was in charge, they no longer felt strongly motivated. And if you ask people how are things going in Iraq, Democrats' perceptions of how the war in Iraq was going skyrocketed the moment Barack Obama was in office. So I think with Christine Blasey Ford, she was really useful to the left right up until the moment Justice Kavanaugh was confirmed. And at that point, it's like, well, that didn't work. Okay, good riddance. And here she is making the media rounds, but is not getting necessarily what you'd expect. Now, it's a busy news cycle. We're in a presidential year. There's the immigration crisis. There's so the economy has still got high prices. Russia, Ukraine. There's no shortage of news. So maybe it's tougher for Christine Blasey Ford to break through about a confirmation fight that is deep in the rearview mirror for most Americans. And Kavanaugh, he's on the court. There's no serious effort to impeach him. So by that standards, it isn't as much. But I salute Kathleen Parker, a fellow Washington Post columnist. It is good that somebody's giving this one more once over and pointing out that this really stuck to Kavanaugh's reputation. And this is going to, when he passes, hopefully many, many years from now, this will end up in the obituary, probably, second or third paragraph. And yet there was never any corroborating evidence. And you sit there and think, how many people could have their reputation destroyed by somebody who comes out and makes a claim, doesn't have any supporting evidence, but is still considered to take seriously, because we're supposed to believe all women except the accusers against Bill Clinton.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. And the other thing that always makes me smile about that story, because most of it is so maddening, is that if the Democrats had just kept their powder dry on trying to filibuster Neil Gorsuch, they would have been successful in filibustering Brett Kavanaugh, because even though Kavanaugh had the votes to confirm, I don't think you get Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who didn't even vote for the nomination, to agree to change the rule. So if they had kept their powder dry, they probably would have gotten somebody different there. But instead, they insisted that was Merrick Garland's seat that Neil Gorsuch was getting. And aren't we all very, very grateful now that Merrick Garland is not on the court?
Hey, considering how slowly the Department of Justice moved against Trump, there are progressives who are really irked with Merrick Garland these days. And maybe a little glad he's not on the court either.
All right. Well, let's talk about some more good news. And that is 4Patriots and the deals you can find at 4patriots.com/martini. The biggest headline over there right now is that the deluxe 3-month survival food kits are back in stock. They were sold out for more than a year, and it's easy to see why, and why demand will be high again, so don't wait to get these. They have now exclusive recipes that are delicious, even better than before. Pancakes, mac and cheese, chili, potato soup, spaghetti, and lasagna. More than 200,000 smart Americans agree this is survival food that tastes good. You just don't know when disaster is going to strike. Like we always say, with 4Patriots, they help you be prepared. Also, don't forget about the last chance items that are still on sale with the Patriot Pure line, including the UV phone sanitizer, the UV wand, the sanitation solution machine, and the disinfecting power bank. You can stash food away and be confident that when a disaster strikes, you and your family will be ready. Go to 4patriots.com/martini to get the deluxe 3-month survival food kit and the peace of mind you deserve. Plus, get free shipping on orders over $97. That's the number 4, patriots.com/martini. That's 4patriots.com/martini.
The Federal Reserve is lying to you. The Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski. Every day, Chris helps unpack the connection between politics and the economy and how it affects your wallet. As Jay Powell continues to tease about lowering interest rates, he needs to raise them. All they're doing is monetizing our debt while inflation remains hot. Why? Government spending way more than it takes in. Whether it's happening in D.C. or down on Wall Street, it's affecting you financially. Be informed. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, Jim, on to our bad martini now. And of course, as Greg Abbott and to some extent Ron DeSantis were sending illegal immigrants to sanctuary cities, since that's the promise that these blue cities had made, was to take care of folks who were illegal and, of course, never hand them over to ICE and so forth. But then they ran out of space in their temporary shelters. And so you had folks like Eric Adams and Governor Healy up in Massachusetts saying, hey, if you've got an extra room in your house, why don't you be a pal and let some of these people just stay in your extra room? Well, apparently that hasn't gone too well, because now we have a new strategy here, and this one's in Michigan. First of all, Governor Gretchen Whitmer is pushing an idea called the Newcomer Rental Subsidy. And the Biden administration, not that long ago, is the one who decided that newcomers is the word we're going to use to describe people who come to this country illegally, and many of whom get to stay a ridiculously long time because of the backlog in having their asylum claims adjudicated. But Gretchen Whitmer has a new idea now, the Newcomer Rental Subsidy. So her idea is not to try and convince you to just be a pal and give people extra rooms in your house. She wants to offer landlords $500 for each illegal alien, which means the taxpayers are going to be paying $500 per month to these people for up to 12 months. They technically have to have legal immigration status, which if you're waiting for your asylum claim, you do. Jim, I don't think this is likely to work either for a number of reasons. Number one, you still aren't likely to have strangers staying in your house, even for $500 a head. And secondly, as Andy and I talked about while you're out, this whole squatting controversy that's been happening in New York City and elsewhere has also got a lot of people concerned. So once you let people into your house, even if there's supposedly a 12-month window on that, who knows how long they would actually get to stay. So what do you make of the next step in this? Hey, we want to get these people in your homes.
Greg, I'm going to date myself, and I'm going to demonstrate what the way my mind works differently than most people's. I hear newcomers, and my first thought goes to the late 1980s movie and television show Alien Nation, about the idea of which these kind of bald, humanoid-looking aliens, they were actually refugees, if I remember correctly. Ship crashes near Los Angeles, very appropriate, and the idea of integrating these aliens into society. It had all kinds of kind of metaphors about immigration and kind of the struggle for these aliens, literal outer space aliens, not metaphorical, illegal aliens, acclimating to American society and the cultural tensions that kind of grew out of that. So I would avoid that. That would not be my first choice of a term to use for these folks. Second of all, the government's going to give you a check if you have people staying in your house in an extra room or extra space. Greg, did Airbnb go out of business? If you're going to do that, you probably find much better rates when you can do that. And probably more legal options if they trash the place while they're there or leave a mess or something like that. Today's Morning Jolt is about two topics. One is about Truth Social, the Trump's media company. But the second part was something that's been chewing on my mind for a while about illegal immigration. And right next to today, Trump is in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He's going to discuss what he calls, quote, Biden's border bloodbath, unquote. Lesson for the media: if you make a big deal out of Trump using a particular word like bloodbath, that's not going to discourage him. That's not deterrence. It makes him want to use that word even more. And so they went through this. I would go through the numbers of the apprehensions, the estimations of folks who've gotten away, but also like those who are seeking asylum. And I think we could all agree that there are people who legitimately deserve asylum. If you can legitimately say that if you go back to your home country, the government will kill you, then I think we in the United States, yes, we should give you asylum. If your claim is that you're at risk from gangs or you're, that's a different story. We're not, running a bed and breakfast for everybody else in the world who doesn't like where they live. And unfortunately, there is such a backlog of claims for asylum But some people were giving court dates in 2033, nearly a decade away. Now, if you can come across the border, claim asylum, and then said, okay, we'll get back to you. You have permission to stay in the country. We'll get back to you in 9 years. That's not technically open borders, but that is functionally open borders. There's very little distinction from that. And Axios had actually run the numbers. They had a quote from internal government projections. The number of people waiting for asylum has increased from about 3 million in the year 2019 to more than 8 million by the end of September of this year. All right, so that's about 5 million people. Where did the Biden administration think that these 5 million people were going to live while they're waiting for their court date nearly a decade from now? We have, our housing, first of all, people are coming across, they're generally coming with the shirt on their backs and maybe a suitcase. They are not coming with significant financial resources. So they need to stay at a shelter. They don't have any option. So the idea that you could just bring in 5 million people and not, certainly with no planning, it all came summarized in that infamous statement from Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, who's like, look, we're Washington, D.C. We don't have the resources to handle all these migrants. We're not a border state. As if California, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona were just awash in extra resources. They just had these huge tracts of lots of houses and places to put these people. No, nobody's got too many resources to deal with people who are utterly impoverished and come here. Now, they're not necessarily bad people, but it just kind of demonstrates the degree which the Biden administration just didn't think through the consequences of a policy like this. And now we're living with them. And surprise, surprise, Biden is facing a difficult road to re-election.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see, even with a Democratic-run legislature in Michigan, I'd be surprised if they pass this because the margins are pretty small, but they've passed a lot of other horrible things on those narrow margins. So we'll see. It's interesting to see the progression on this. I had people tell me this might happen, asking people to let illegals stay in your house. Then they might pay them. And the next step would be, if they don't get enough takers there, allegedly would be a vacancy tax. So if you've got extra rooms in your house and somehow the government gets word of that, then you're going to pay through the nose for the fact that you have empty rooms in your house, and then it'll put pressure on you to take the stipend instead of paying through your nose on the taxes. That hasn't happened, but given what we've seen before, who knows? Like you said, this was not only preventable, but not planned for at all when you got millions upon millions of people pouring into the country. So, Jim, fascinating to see what will happen there. And as always, good to see you. We'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Do subscribe to the podcast if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. Thank you very much for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Tuesday, and join us again on Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.